Hello, and welcome to Church Online with the Denver Church of Christ. It's great to have you here today. And as always, it is amazing to have the kids here. I hope all the kids are enjoying this day, and I hope you loved Church Online. But I have just one more thing I'd like you to do. And I wanted to ask you a question. Have you ever done something that you love doing, but that it also makes you angry? I mean, something that you just can't wait to do, but while you're doing it, you also get so frustrated. And maybe it's art. Maybe you love to draw or you love to paint, but sometimes when you mess up when you draw or you paint, you just get mad. Or maybe you love sports and you just love to play football or soccer or basketball, and yet you get frustrated with either your teammates or how you're doing in the midst of the game. Or maybe you love video games. I'm sure a lot of kids love video games. And I know that during video games, people can get really frustrated. You know, in my house, a lot of times at 5 p.m., all the boys come together in the house and we do a Smash Bros tournament, which is a game on the Nintendo Switch. And we have so much fun playing Smash Bros. But my son Justice, every time he plays as Pikachu. And every time him and I battle against one another, it seems like even if I'm beginning my move first, he hits me before I hit him. And I get so frustrated because he plays Pikachu every single time. And I can't beat him usually when he plays Pikachu. And I get mad and I get frustrated and I just, but I love to play. And I'm wondering if there's something like that for you, just something that you love doing, but that also sometimes makes you mad. What I'd love for you to do is draw a picture of you doing the thing that you love doing that also sometimes makes you a little frustrated. And if your parents can take that picture and text it to the number below, we're having people put together movies that we put online later of all these pictures. And you can ask your parents if you can go online later and look at the movie with your picture in it. But draw a picture for us of something that you love doing, but that sometimes makes you just a little bit mad. Now, as we get into church today, for those of you who are visiting, we've taken this year to study out the concept of legacy. And what we're sincerely hoping is that our members figure out ways that they can leave throughout the course of this year a legacy of faith behind. So that when our time comes, when we look back on our lives, what we see is that we've left a very strong legacy of our beliefs and of our faith. And that's what we're studying out this year. And the series this month is called The Investors. And what we're looking at is that the fact that we want to leave a legacy behind means that we also have to invest something of ourselves. You know, personally, financially, our time, our talent, we have to invest ourselves in order to leave a meaningful legacy behind. And that's what we're studying out this entire month. And today's sermon is called Death by Suburb. Now, I'm going to put up here a picture. And I want to see if you could recognize this robot in this picture. And if you recognize the movie that it's from, I want you to write it in the chat function right now. If you recognize this, and I will be impressed if you can recognize this robot. But this robot is from a movie. And this image represents to me the concept of death by suburb. Because the movie that this robot was in is Rocky IV. And in the Rocky franchises, in the good movies, 1 through 4, some people debate 4, but I think 4 is a great movie. But in the first 4 movies, there's 2 times in Rocky's career where he has to kind of pull himself out of complacency and lethargy. Because in the first couple movies, he didn't have a lot of money, and he wasn't a well-known fighter, and he had to fight and strive, and he had a hunger, and he had to use all that to succeed. And then he gets success. And he gets wealthy, and he has money and security, and he deserved all of it. And what this robot is, this robot was something that he bought his brother-in-law, Paulie. Now, Paulie is kind of a difficult character to like, and he's not easy to get along with for anybody in the family. And actually, Rocky bought this robot because he thought maybe this robot could handle Paulie and would be able to stand being around Paulie. But this robot, to me, becomes indicative, and it becomes the image of just kind of the extravagance of spending and consumption that the suburban lifestyle brings. And there's twice in the Rocky franchises where Rocky had to leave this life of comfort and ease in order to get back his fighting edge. And it first happened in Rocky 3. 3 years after he won the title, there's a serious contender for the championship, a man named Clubber Lang. And Mickey knows that all of the success and all of the wealth has softened Rocky. And he tells Rocky at some point, he goes, you can't beat Clubber Lang because you've gotten civilized. And it means that he's gotten soft and he's just lost all the hunger and edge that he once had. Rocky was suffering a death by Suburb. You know, in the biblical narrative, the concepts of wealth and rot and corrosion are oftentimes associated with one another, and for good reason. I mean, wealth is diminishing, either over a lifetime or over a generation or two. Wealth rots away. But perhaps more importantly, it becomes something that's corrosive to our own souls, corrosive to the human heart. There's just way too much deception that goes along with our wealth because it gives such convincing proofs of security that we become enamored with wealth. Not everybody desires wealth because it gives power or because it gives distinction. I would say most people want wealth because it provides for ease and it provides for comfort and it provides for safety and for security for individuals and for the people that individual loves. Wealth seems to protect and give more opportunity. Where so many others live in vulnerable exposure to the brutal world around them, those who have money seem to be protected, right? But I think that's only true in certain ways. Maybe only in the most obvious ways wealth protects us. In the ways where danger is clear, but is also not necessarily harmful to the soul. And this is where we get to James chapter 5. So go ahead and open your Bibles to James chapter 5. And we're going to read a passage from this book towards the end. And James has addressed this topic of wealth a couple different times already in the scriptures. And it says in James chapter 5, starting in verse 1, "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted, and the moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who moved your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who were not opposing you." Now, wealth and the rich are a subject that James has been addressing, and he's not been addressing it in any sort of gentle way. And some of the offenses that he's describing, especially in this passage, he describes in a way that makes it easy for us to disassociate ourselves from. Because hopefully we don't have people that are doing work for us that we're refusing to pay. Hopefully in our wealth, we're not refusing to pay our bills. Hopefully we're not refusing to pay the wages that are owed to the people that have provided us services like cell phones or internet or utilities or anything like that. And probably it's a very good assumption that none of us have had someone killed who is bringing financial charges of fraud against us. Probably none of us have done that. Now, but I think that this points out a habit that I see in so many people, including myself, that's perplexing. Because rarely do people ever think of themselves as bad people. No one wants to be a bad person usually. They don't want to admit that about themselves, therefore. The black and white dichotomy between good and evil that we see in stories and movies, however, doesn't really exist in the real world. Most people are on a spectrum between good and bad or bad and good. And in reality, we become bad along that spectrum without really ever noticing. We often see it happening to the ones we love, and we even see it happening to the people that we despise. We can see corruption and rot and corrosion happening to the people with whom we're not well acquainted and those with whom we love dearly. But rarely do we recognize it in ourselves. And that's part of the danger of wealth, is that we don't see the bad that it's doing to us. See, there's a bit of a crescendo that's taking place in the passages that we just read in James, because it just begins with kind of an honest rebuke of the wealthy and for their complacency. But it quickly turns into a condemnation for people taking advantage of the poor and not paying what they're owed. And in the end, it ends with even leveling what I think is the death of Christ against the wealthy. So something is happening in this passage that goes beyond money, sort of. See, James is likely talking specifically to the Sadducees and the chief priests, those who have grown wealthy off of the power that they have through running the temple. You know, those same people who saw Jesus as a threat to that power and therefore also a threat to their wealth. So they had him executed, though he provided no resistance to them. Did they know that they were bad? Did they know that what they were about to do would be associated as one of the most heinous crimes ever written in the history of writing? I seriously doubt it. I seriously doubt that they saw themselves as bad people. As a matter of fact, they probably saw themselves as people who were trying to protect Judaism and trying to protect the temple itself. But in reality, they were protecting the interests that they had in the temple and in Judaism, interests that were making them very, very wealthy. And I think that is the ultimate effect of wealth within every single person, is that it blinds us to our self-interest. You know, and I was a perpetuator of that this very week. See, I'd gone to the grocery store earlier in the week, and I was in a hurry because I had made dinner. My wife wasn't feeling well, so I was overseeing dinner, and so I had meat on the grill. And I needed to go to the grocery store really quickly, so I went there, got my stuff, came back out, and I was approached by a man in the parking lot. And maybe you guys have been in this situation before, but as soon as someone approaches me in the parking lot, all my guards go up right away. And he had asked me if I could take some time to help him because he was in need. And, you know, I immediately began explaining that I was in a huge hurry. I was trying to get dinner done for the kids and I needed to get going. I just really didn't even have a minute to spare. And I could just see his face fall as I was talking to him. And in the next couple seconds, I felt like I lived an entire day, because the first thing I felt was shame and humiliation at not being willing to help this man, which was followed very quickly by irritation and frustration at having to feel shame over not helping this man. And I was tempted to kind of double down on my initial argument of, I've got stuff to do. It's not my responsibility. He's probably trying to scam me anyway. But then I just had this moment of clarity, thank goodness. And I was like, I can help you. And so I said, of course I can spare a little bit of time to help you out. And, you know, he was parked bumper to bumper with me pretty much, and his car would not start. And so we very quickly determined he just had a dead battery or something. And so we just jump started his car. It took about 10 minutes and then we were done. And honestly, I drove home feeling ashamed that I was resistant to helping a neighbor who probably lived in the same community that I did, because I felt a weird need to protect my interests. In this case, it was dinner or the possibility that he might be trying to scam me out of money. And neither of those excuses are worth giving up my call to charity or goodwill or self-sacrifice. The suburbs are literally killing me. And I don't mean that as some melodramatic announcement. Every day, this life of privilege that we all live threatens to destroy our connection to the purpose that God lays out for us. The desire to guard all that I've been blessed with, my self-interest, threatens to blind me to what's going on in the world around me. I'm getting too civilized. Now, can you see it in yourself? Can you see the effect of all of this in yourself? And I'm not saying that you've not had, hurdles that you've had to jump over or obstacles that you've had to climb in your life. I'm not saying that you've had things easy. And I'm definitely not saying that you don't deserve what you have. But anyone that lives in this country that cannot see the wealth they possess, especially when compared to the history of the world and people who are living in the remainder of the world, if you can't see that, you are a fool. And anyone that doesn't see their wealth as a threat to honest perspective in their life is also a fool. You have to understand that wealth and privilege is going to be a constant blind spot. Proverbs 18 verse 10 talks about this delusion. And in verse 10, it says, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower, and the righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall." Death by suburb is not an imaginary sickness. It can be simply the natural result of living a blessed life if we're not careful. Our blessings can provide a potential psychosis for us, where we imagine wealth can actually protect us. And we seek it as a refuge instead of seeking the name of the Lord as a refuge. Death by suburb is the ostrich who's hiding from the lion by sticking his head in the ground. Except in this case, it's a rich man or woman protecting their self-interest, believing that by protecting their things, they're actually protecting their lives as well. I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with the suburban lifestyle or the American lifestyle, but I'm also not saying it's inherently good or safe for us. I think that we need a generous dose of adventure and sacrifice and risk in our lives on a consistent basis. We cannot get to the point where we believe that our wealth can sustain or protect us. We need to leaven in that risk and that danger and that edge throughout the way that we live. Do you know who can often see our blindness in this area most clearly? The youth. Those who have very little, who fear losing what they have. The youth they're not really that scared of losing what they have. And they care more about building experiences often than they care about building things or building stuff or having more stuff. If you want a clearer and sometimes brutally and insultingly clearer image of yourself, go ask a teenager or college student if they think that you care more about your beliefs or more about your style or your stuff. If you're brave enough to ask that question, you're going to get some honest answers. Again, and it's not as though it's inevitable that this American lifestyle will kill any of our ideals or our passion or our soul, but it often does. And we'd be foolish not to acknowledge that danger. Which is why for some people, Jesus consistently said that they had to sell everything they had in order to follow him. They just simply couldn't understand God and still hold on to all of the possessions that they had. There was no way for them to comprehend everything they might gain in Jesus and still hold on to everything they had in their previous life. Now, more of us than we might want to admit might fall into that same exact category. And we are susceptible, therefore, to a slow and uneventful death by suburb. In Luke chapter 23, the Bible describes one of Jesus' last interactions. And I think that this is one of the most potent things that he said. But it says in verse 33 of chapter 24 of Luke, "When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his left and the other on his right. Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.' And they divided up his clothes by casting lots." Even as criminals are stealing the very last of his earthly possessions, as he unjustly dies a criminal's death, he prays to God for those thieves, for they don't know what they are doing. And to me, this sums up both who Jesus is and what happens to us when we're not paying attention to the effect of wealth upon us. Because on one hand, we see Jesus, who easily lets go of the very last things he owns and forgives those who takes them, while we so often are so focused on obtaining something else in this life that we don't even notice what Jesus is doing for us. I think as we take communion right now, let's think about the ways that the suburbs might be killing us, might be crushing our soul, the way that our wealth and our privilege might be rotting some of the heart that's within us. Let's be willing to ask some tough questions, and let's see Jesus, who cared so very little for the possessions of this world, and for that reason was so free. And for that reason, people were so attracted to him and to the life that he was living. And he so often asked us, in order to understand that freedom, to give up the things that we are possessing. I think if we're going to leave a legacy of faith, we have to be willing to let go. Otherwise, we may die a death by suburb. Let's go ahead and pray for communion right now. Father, thank you so much for your generosity, for all the ways that you have blessed us in this world. We, perhaps above all people in history, are the most blessed. We live a life of security and safety with our families, and we're so grateful for that, Father. Help us to be generous. Help us to think about the ways that we can utilize what you give us to help other people. God, I pray right now as we take up communion that we remember the way that Jesus gave himself in this world. As we take up the bread, we remember this lifestyle that he lived of letting go of things and telling others that they need to let go of things, and the way that he was so freely able to give himself to so many people and the impact that that had, Father. And as we take up the fruit of the vine, Father, we remember that he gave himself even unto death. He gave his blood for us as well, Father. He held on to nothing. Help us to imitate that lifestyle, Father. I'm so grateful for his sacrifice and for the hope that it offers us and for the hope that it offers all of our loved ones for the future. I love you, God, so much. Thank you for this time. It's in your son's name that I pray. Amen.